Okay, so good evening. Tonight is going to be a very, very interesting topic, and it has to do with the confusion that people are in these days. We're at the end of days, at the end of times, and it is already predicted by the prophets that there will be a lot of darkness. And darkness means a lack of clarity. People are going to be confused. Just take the example of what's going on with the vaccine, with the vaccinations. Should we take it or not take it? We thought that we were done with it, with the corona, and here apparently there's another strain of it, and people don't really know what's going to be, what's going to happen, what's going to be next. And this is part of the prophecy that more than ever before, there will be this darkness that will make things so unclear. And in order to be able to see through this darkness, we need to learn. And that is the idea of these lectures, is to shed some light, to bring some clarity to some of the things that are going on today. The bigger subject of what's going to be in the end of days, even though I've already discussed it in the past, I'm going to be giving a special lecture perhaps sometime after the holidays on what to expect, as best as we know, of course. But in the meantime, it will help us to gain a little bit more clarity as to what is going on today. What exactly is this darkness that we're talking about, that the prophet said that there will be? A tremendous darkness. So I have to give you just a little bit of an introduction, because I've already covered some of it in the past in another lecture called The Root of War. Tonight's topic, however, has two parts to it. It's making sense of the times, trying to figure out what's going on, and whose side are you on? Because if you are able to decide on whose side you're going to be on, it will help you. And you will understand, as I explain later on, what does it mean to be on a particular side. The darkness that we're talking about here, the rabbis tell us, is that right before Mashiach comes, the world will go down to the 50th level of tum'ah, of impurity. Impurity, but that's something that not everybody is familiar with. What exactly is impurity? There are impure forces. But you don't really have to study Kabbalah to understand impurity, because you will soon be able to sense what I'm talking about. There's tremendous opposing forces in the world. And one is dark and one is light. So let's just say impurity are the forces of darkness. And the rabbis tell us that the 50th level, the lowest level, is heresy. Heresy means a complete detachment from belief in God, or from worship of God. And this will be prevalent, or very much observable, very much seen in the end of days more than ever. And this will cause tremendous confusion. This will also be seen as in the form of tremendous decadence or immorality. You will notice that everything is just falling apart. So the darkness that we will be in, that we are in right now, is quite observable now more than 30, 40 years ago, for sure. You can actually see the difference. Unless you're a child, you're just growing up today, a teenager, you don't know what it was like before. What does it mean that things are different today? Well, not only is it like what the rabbis described, that the truth is lacking, but also something very, very strange is happening that never really happened before. And that is what the rabbis say will be oivei ish anshei beito, that even your own family members will be your enemies. How could that be? Your own family members? Yes, it is possible because of the lack of respect that children will have for the elders. And of course, you recall how much respect there was for a father. My mother would tell me that they all were scared to even open their mouth to say something without asking permission. This was when they sat at the table, you know. It was this respect that they gave to the parents, to the elders. And this was all over the world, pretty much. It wasn't just in one country. And it wasn't just one religion. All over the world there was a greater respect for the values of the past, and of course for the elders, for one's parents. So all of that will not be so strong. There will be respect, but it won't be as strong, it won't be as noticeable as it was in the past. So what exactly is this force of impurity? What is exactly going on that we call it a force, a certain power? If you learned physics, you will probably recall that in the physical world there are four forces, even though there are more, but basically there are four forces that are continuously at work. One is gravity, which we can actually see. The other one is called the electromagnetic force. Then we have the weak nuclear force and the strong nuclear force. That is how they are known. And we're not going to get into them, but it's a fascinating subject actually for those who enjoy physics, how they all work and how they function in this world. But this is the physical world, a world that we're familiar with, that we can see, that we can somehow relate to, we can measure. But there's also a spiritual world. There's another dimension that people are not aware of or are not paying attention to. And in this spiritual world, there are also forces. And I just call it the force of light and the force of darkness. But you could also call it the force of duality. The forces of duality, as the Kabbalah teaches, there are two of everything except for God. God is one. But as we look at the spiritual world, you will see, and the physical world also, that there's a certain duality. Not only day and night, but also male and female. You have fire and water. And what's interesting about this duality is that they're opposites, right and left. But even though they're opposites, they get along. They actually create the balance that we need. We need to have them. And that is how we get a certain balance. But some of that balance is not so observable in the physical world because it's more of a spiritual duality or a spiritual force. In order to be able to see them in the reality, in order to be able to get a feel for these forces, we just need to look at Yaakov and Esav. The two brothers, the twins of which I talked about, how they're so different, how they represent those different forces. Once you understand, once you analyze the differences between the two brothers and what they represent, you get a feel for what we're talking about. Esav is blessed with a very unusual type of blessing. Al harbecha tichyeh, you will live by the sword. What kind of a blessing is that, to live by the sword? Who wants to live by the sword? But that blessing really is not just about being successful at war. It's about what this individual will be mostly focused on. And where will all his strength be concentrated at? His desires, his interests will be about conquering, conquests, wars. Look throughout history and that's what you see all over. It never stopped. War, 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 war. Continuous war. That's the power of Esav. Then you have the power of Yaakov, Jacob. It's a spiritual power. He sits in the tents. Sits in the tents is referencing spirituality, study, disseminating the knowledge of God. He has no interest in war. He's a peaceful man, Ish Tam, as the Torah describes him. Very simple, very good nature, peaceful. Two very, very opposite brothers, two different missions. And obviously this is all from above. This was intended to be like that. Two opposing forces. They don't get along whatsoever. And Esav, as a result of his interests, he's drawn to this physical world, as the rabbis tell us, to Olam Hazeh. Yaakov is interested for some reason in the birthright. Why? Because that represents doing the service of God. That represents the world to come. Not this world. It doesn't mean he can't have a normal life in this world too. but it's de-emphasized. It's not supposed to be emphasized. You're not supposed to apply too much effort to the physical world if you belong to Yaakov, if you're on his side, in his camp. Because his camp represents spirituality, good deeds, to be helpful, to be peaceful, to be a servant of God. So what you have in this world is these two forces, the spiritual forces, each one pulling in another direction, in an opposing direction. And they're very, very powerful. And they've been around for a long time now. But how do we actually see these forces? We see it, if we narrow it down, there are various expressions of these forces, but if you narrow it down, you will see, as the Kabbalah teaches, the power of Yaakov is in the act of giving. He's good-natured. He wants to do good. He wants to do the will of God. And that is what? To give. To love. And the opposite koach, the opposite force, the force of Esav, is to receive, to want for himself, to take. Very opposite, very different, right? One is to give, one is to take. Now, who has this and who has that? People are a mixture. It's not just one nation has this and one nation has that. People have a mixture of the two in them. And how is that known in Judaism? It is known as Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara. Very simple. You have the evil inclination and you have the good inclination. Everybody has that. It's just that the good inclination for some reason is stronger. And I say for some reason because if you really want to understand this a little bit more, you have to study Kabbalah or the Tanya, on which I have a whole series of lectures. Why is it that certain souls emphasize or have more of the inclination to do good and the inclination to do bad? Now, even though they may have more of an inclination than the other, it does not mean that they don't have free will. You still have free will. That's a very important key to remember. Just because you are inclined to want to do something doesn't mean you can't control yourself. Never say, this is the way I am. No, you can change. You can control yourself. You could learn to adapt to the situation. You can train yourself to be a better person. So no one should ever come up with this excuse. This is the way I am. This is my philosophy. This is my culture. This is my character. No, no, no. It may be that the way you are by nature, but you can control it. And people have demonstrated this, many, many times, where they actually became better people. They turned around and became completely different human beings from what they were in the past. And by the way, that's for good or for bad. They become bad or they become good. So these two powers, the evil inclination and the good inclinations, are continuously at work by everyone. Jew and non-Jew alike, doesn't make a difference. Now, towards the end of days, something very unusual is going to happen. And I don't think anyone has spoken about this in these terms. And this may be the first time you hear this. Why did World War I and World War II occur? Now, I'm not talking about the history behind these two wars. Because the history, you can look it up yourself. There are many, many books on how they began. What triggered World War I? What triggered World War II? But most of you are familiar with the sides, I think. Maybe more from World War II because it's more recent. But basically you had two sides. What are the two sides? In World War I you had the Allies, remember? And you had the Central Powers. Who were the Central Powers? In other words, who the Allies were fighting against? You had Germany, you had the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and you had the Ottoman Empire. Okay? The main ones. Who were the Allies? Great Britain, France, United States, right? Russia. Same thing World War II. It's very interesting that somehow we had allies, the United States, when they joined the war, and Great Britain, France, Russia, and there were other countries as well that decided later on to join, but in the beginning they didn't want to join. They were neutral. There were some actually that changed sides. It's very interesting in World War I and World War II how the sides were identifiable. And what was going on? You had allies fighting the Central Powers, or the Axis powers in World War II, as they were called. And it's very, very strange. The whole thing is strange because what did they fight about? How did it all begin? Especially World War I is very, very strange. World War II, well, you have Germany, who wants to take over the world, or at least Europe. And the guy is very, very clear about his plan, even though he didn't tell it to everyone. He definitely did not share it with Russia, because he made peace with Russia in the very beginning. But what is the war really all about? In other words, spiritually speaking, we have two forces here. They're called allies and they're called the Axis powers. For the first time in history, what you have here is a world war. You never had this before. So this is a significant war. It's not only a war where millions of people lost their life, both World War I and World War II. It's a world war that involves many countries, alliances. Strange, no? You know what's unique about this war? Is that you have a few countries, a few nations, called the Allies, who are actually fighting evil. It's very clear. If you look at World War I and World War II, what's really involved here is this is going to be the last war. This is going to be a war to end all wars. That's what some wanted to say. Because there's a lot of evil there. So the Allies really would have preferred not to go to war, but they had no choice. Here you have evil powers. You have evil who's waging war, who's starting the wars. And what is it all about? Territory. More territory, more influence, more power. So that we understand, because that's the power of Esav, to live by the sword, to conquer more, and we have it throughout history. Everybody wanted to take control and defeat the other country and tax it, enslave it, but this war is different. Here we have allies fighting the other power because they want to fight the evil. These are evil forces. And in World War II, we actually saw a lot of evil. So why is this? Well, if this is the war that is towards the end of days, the end of times, then that makes some sense. Evil is about to be destroyed. There's going to be all kinds of wars. Physical wars, which we saw in World War I and World War II, and spiritual wars as well. There's a certain clash, a certain conflict between these forces all the time. In people too. People have this war in themselves. They don't identify it as a war, but they're anxious, they're tense, they're nervous, they're depressed. They don't feel good. There is this conflict in themselves. Something is missing. But what about the neutral powers? What's that? Why didn't they take a side? Now you're getting to understand why I chose the title. Whose side are you on? In those wars, it was possible to be neutral. I won't bother you, you don't bother me. There were several countries like Switzerland, Portugal, right, and Spain, somewhat I guess, was also neutral. And that's good. Okay. Don't get involved in the war. And actually it was very good that they didn't. But can you always be neutral? No. In that war, in a physical war, sometimes it's actually a good idea to be neutral. But in the end of days, people will have to choose sides. You will not be able to be neutral. And that's part of what I'm talking about tonight. People will actually have to choose. You're going to make a decision on whose side do you want to be. So during the World War I and World War II, but especially World War II, there was a very unusual phenomena that happened. Here we're talking about evil, fighting evil, right? And you've heard of the term the righteous of the nations, Chasidei Umot Haolam. Do you know that in the midst of all this evil, a war is very, very cruel and dangerous. You had angels, people who risked their lives to save others, to protect Jews, to hide them. In I think 51 countries this happened. The righteous of the nations. And many of them are listed in Yad Vashem in Israel. Non-Jews, for the most part, who risked their lives, who went beyond what they were capable of doing. In other words, they did a tremendous amount of effort to protect, whether it was a baby, child, or an adult, whatever. And they actually saved many, many lives as a result of their actions. Why did they do it? It's one thing, if you're not risking your life, it's easy to explain. Some people are good-natured, some people have compassion. But to risk your life, wow, that's something else. And I've spoken about this in another lecture, how certain people stood out and what made them do that. But in order to briefly understand what's going on over here, after all, we're talking about war, and there's a lot of evil, and here there's good that stands out. Let's just say briefly that what motivated them to do good was because the inclination towards good in them was more powerful than the inclination of evil. I'm just trying to simplify it. If we are going to try to understand them on a simple level, why they were motivated, why they were willing, prepared to take this risk, their life was in danger. And to save another person's life is because their inclination to do good was more powerful. It was stronger than the inclination to do bad, to be selfish, to think of yourself. Remember we said before, one is the power to give or to love, another one is the power to take or to hate. People have it in different degrees. So their power of doing good was apparently stronger than the average. How does this happen? In other words, what is exactly going on in a person's mind? Well, we would have to ask them. And I'm sure you would get different kinds of answers. But Kabbalistically, the soul subconsciously feels, understands that she's accountable for her deeds. That there is a book upstairs where all these deeds are being written down. Yesh din v'yesh dayan, there is justice, there is a judge. And as the rabbis tell us in the ethics of our fathers, Pirkei Avot, Ayin ro'ah, ozen shomat v'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim. There is upstairs an eye that sees, an ear that hears everything, and all your deeds are documented, everything is written down. So somehow the neshama, the soul, subconsciously feels that she will be held accountable. You could have helped someone, you could have saved someone's life, had you tried a little bit harder, had you not thought about yourself so much. So this feeling, subconscious feeling of someone is watching me, is very powerful. Just that not everybody pays attention. Today we have cameras. Cameras in the street. We can see a car accident from across the globe. The police use it. Cameras for all kinds of reasons, to catch thieves, right? To know what's going on. If we can make those cameras, you don't think that upstairs there's even a more powerful camera that's watching everyone? As I've explained many times, that those who had a near-death experience, an NDE, were able sometimes to see their entire life go by like a video. When they went upstairs momentarily, they saw their life, the good and the bad of what they've done. Everything was recorded. But people get distracted. What distracts them, of course, and doesn't make them think about these things, is the material world. This generation, the generation right before Mashiach comes, will be the most materialistic of all. And what's wrong with that? The more materialism, the more the physical body of the individual becomes acclimated or becomes used to physicality and is drawn more to it than to spirituality. The more physical a person becomes, the more the negative forces in him become stronger. If a person is content with a little bit, he's not so extravagant, he does not have great desires from the physical world, then he doesn't have to deal with all these challenges that people have. Should I buy a new car? Not buy a new car? You know, people have these questions, people have these conflicts, and they fight over it. But if a person lives a normal life, a spiritual life, and is not so much into the physicality, into materialism, he won't have this conflict in him. So in Judaism, we have a tremendous day that helps us focus properly. And what is that day? Coming up a month from now, Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Judgment. And this Day of Judgment is unique because it's not only our Day of Judgment, it's a judgment for the entire world. It's supposed to remind us that there is a king, there is a boss, that we are held accountable. We're going to court. What did you do? What should you not have done that you did? Everything is taken into consideration. Everything is evaluated. So this day of Rosh Hashanah is supposed to instill in us a little bit that respect and fear from the Almighty, just so that we should be able to focus properly. Yes, perhaps we didn't do things right. Next year we'll do it better. So we need that. We need reminders, constant reminders that we should be focused elsewhere than what we have been doing in the past year. So how do we know if what we're doing is right or wrong? Is there any way that we can tell? So I explained once that the purpose, one of the reasons why Hashem gives us a test or a challenge, it's not for Him to find out whether we are loyal to Him or not. Even though that's true, the test will determine our loyalty or not. But He knows, He can read our mind, He knows what's in our heart. Then why does He put us through a test that will challenge our faith in some way? The test is for us, because if we go through a test and we don't do well, hopefully we will realize it. Oh no, I failed. I didn't do it right. Had you not had that test, you wouldn't know. So the test sometimes helps us realize, look, this is the level you're at, a very, very low level. And you have so much more potential. How many times do people take tests? Especially lawyers, sometimes they fail so many times, they almost give up. But they don't want to give up. This is important to them. This is their career. Well, perhaps they should think of another career if they failed so many times. Some tests are very, very difficult, but I'm not talking about those exams. I'm talking about real life tests that happen from time to time, whether it's at home, the relationship between a husband and wife, between a parent and a child, neighbors, friends, co-workers. We're challenged all the time. And one of those challenges, believe it or not, that is very powerful is money. Imagine, just think for a moment, what you would do. You see in the middle of the street a bundle of cash. And they're $100 bills, by the way, not $1 bills. It's tempting. It's just laying there. What would you do? Would you pick it up? And if you pick it up, would you keep it? I mean, obviously you would say to yourself, well, if there's no name on it, perhaps I should keep it. But what if there was a name? Then it becomes more challenging. Should I give it to the police? Should I return it to the guy? There's a phone number there. It's tempting. Now, if it's just $100, $200, it may not be so tempting, but what if it's $50,000? When I talk about bribes and corruption, they tell me that in the United States it's very difficult to bribe a judge, to bribe a policeman. It's not Latin America, where it's a little easier because they're underpaid, the police. And they tell me here you won't really find it. I said, that's not true, I don't believe that. It all depends how much we're talking about. Maybe $2,000 is not enough, but what if you offer the police $25,000? for whatever reason, you were caught doing something. What if you're bribed with a large amount of money? You think people are not corruptible? Most are. The rabbis tell us it's very clear. When it comes to money, many, many people fail. In other words, they fall for it. Money. If it's something else, maybe they won't fall for it, but money is a problem depending on the sum. So we're constantly being challenged with different kinds of challenges. One may not interest us, may not make us fall, and another one may. So if you have a guy who's temperamental, he may actually become very, very angry. Now, in anger, there's also various degrees. He can pick up an object and throw it at the person who he's angry at. He can walk out. He can say obscenities, bad words. There's a lot of things that a person can do. How one reacts depends on how much self-control he has. But he's being tested. Right? He's married and he sees another woman. He's tested. What should I do? Should I hold myself back, or should I get involved, or should I be nice? How nice? How much should you talk? You have to be careful because you can't guarantee that you'll be able to control yourself in this area. So we're constantly being tested. So now we've come to the question. These are powerful forces, the good and the bad. The evil inclination, the good inclination. They're powerful. Why is it then the rabbis tell us that the power of the evil inclination is a lot stronger? It's a lot stronger. And a lot of people do not succeed in controlling themselves, in passing all the tests. It doesn't appear to be fair. Now remember what I said before. Just because there's a powerful evil inclination doesn't mean that you can't control it. You can. It just may take a lot of effort, a lot of work. But it's just the fact that the evil inclination does have a lot of power. And the question is, why is it that he somehow succeeds to lure people, to tempt people, to make them fall, instead of the good inclination succeeding in making them be good? And this goes back to our question before. There were some angels during the Holocaust that risked their life. They did so much good. Why only them? I like to explain it in the following way. If you've ever taken out a mortgage, you know perhaps a little bit about loans, that the lender wants to be in first position. Because any additional loan that comes later, like a second, is not in a strong position. And if you want a second, they're going to charge you a lot more money for it, because there's more of a risk. The guy goes bankrupt, they have to foreclose. Who gets the house, or who gets first position, or first rights? The first lender, the first loan. The one who's in first position is always better off. The rabbis tell us the evil inclination is in first position. He was there from the moment of birth. The good inclination only comes when a child matures and becomes 13 years old, bar mitzvah. So he's 13 years older, the evil inclination. He needs that inclination at birth because that's the inclination that controls our desires to eat and sleep as well. So that one you have to have. You don't have the good inclination at the very start because that would confuse the child. The child cannot make mature decisions. Once the child has grown and he's become more mature, he's able to decide. So that's when he gets that force at the age of 13. And then the conflicts begin. Who should I listen to? On whose side should I be? But that is the job of the evil inclination. The job of the evil inclination is to tempt. And unfortunately, he's very, very powerful. What's our job? And our job is to conquer that evil inclination. Here we're talking about conquering evil, defeating evil at war. We have this war constantly in us. And this war will be even more powerful at the end of days. We talked about this darkness, lack of clarity. And people really are confused. There's a lot of confusion. Because of this inner conflicts too. Not just what's going on in the outside world. What we see in the outside world is really some ways a reflection of what's going on internally in us. All this confusion, all of this darkness, pessimism, depression. But we have no choice. In this war, you can't be neutral. You have to take sides. You have to fight. I don't want to fight. I want to stay out of this fight. You have no choice. You have to take a side. On whose side are you? You have to fight the evil inclination. You can't just say, I'm not going to fight. That's my nature. I'll let it go wherever he wants to go. No. He's going to lead you astray. He's going to cause you a lot of trouble. How many people land in jail? I'm talking about not criminals. Good people. Businessmen. How many of those land in jail? Quite a few. Because they made a mistake. Knowingly or not knowingly makes no difference. They fell for it. They were tempted. Whatever it was. They didn't fight this war against the evil inclination. So how do you fight the evil inclination? You first have to be able to identify him. You have to know your enemy. I'll give you just a small example. I spoke about it on the Persian TV, actually, this topic. The silent enemy. The media. We hear the news all the time. For those who like to hear the news, some people hear the news a whole day, some just a little bit. My advice to you, the less the better. Because what's happening with all the media, with all the news, it is affecting us. We don't even realize it's making us tense and nervous. And making us feel not good. It's not healthy to hear all that. Bad news. How much good news are you going to hear? Occasionally you hear some good news, but most of it is not good news. It's not beneficial. So even though we love to be informed, we want to know what's going on in the world, people don't realize it. It brings tension into one's life to hear everything that's going on. All the corruption and all the infighting, the politics, the wars, the battles, the death, the cruelty. Every day somebody's shot. People are killed. So all of that is not good. It's not healthy. And imagine if kids are seeing this on TV. They're not just hearing it, they're seeing it with their eyes. Or seeing movies. Oh, this is a movie, but still, it's the same. It's images. What's this doing to them? So this causes tremendous pressures and tensions. This is part of the reason why people are not happy these days. And you would think, well, wait a minute, this is the generation where there's so much comfort, luxury. Never has there been a generation like the one we have today. Do you know what it is to have central air? If you're living in a very hot country. What did they do years ago when they didn't have it? It wasn't easy. I just gave you central air as a quick example. There are so many things that make life easier for us today. Microwaves. Just gas heating. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to chop your own wood. Life is a lot more comfortable today. That people should be happier today. No, doesn't that make sense? But they're not. Why not? The simple answer is because the human being has become very shallow. Shallow means that he does not know what's really important in life, and he values the things that are very insignificant. So therefore, he himself is shallow, meaning he's empty. He doesn't have the integrity that people had in the past when they knew to value the real things that were real meaningful in life. The prophet speaks about this too. Hashem tells the Jewish people, I don't need your sacrifices. You think that's all I need? I need an animal? I need you to rectify your deeds. Lama li rov sivchechem, he says. Why bring me all these sacrifices? And same thing with one going to the priest and confessing your sins. Is that it? That's all you're going to do is confess? Aren't you going to change? Aren't you going to make a commitment to be a better person? Aren't you going to try? You think confession is enough? So that's what the prophet tells us. He rebukes us. Hashem doesn't want shallow people, empty people that don't have integrity. Where are your values? And part of the problem is that we emphasize the wrong things. We have the wrong priorities. So if you wonder why there's no peace today, why isn't there any peace? There's the United Nations. They went through 2 world wars. How come there's still no peace today? So I saw someone explain it very nicely. Peace is not only absence of war, it is also a state of mind. You have to be in peace with yourself. And if you're not in peace with yourself, then obviously, how could you expect that peace should extend itself to others? People are going to continuously be at war if they're not in peace with themselves, if they don't have that tranquility. A person who's in peace with himself behaves completely differently. And I think the best way to explain it is through Munbaz, the king. A very famous king who's mentioned in the Talmud. He was a convert that came from in the area of North Iraq, Arabim. His family, him, his mother. And he was a very righteous individual. So righteous that one year there was a shortage of food. It was a time where people really struggled with making a living, and they suffered. So he emptied out the treasures of his palace. He basically took that money and distributed it to the poor and helped them out. So who was upset? Who could be upset? Everybody's happy, no? His own family. They came running to him and says, "What are you doing? Your forefathers accumulated wealth and you are giving it away." So he answered back, "My forefathers accumulated wealth down here below. I accumulated upstairs. They accumulated wealth in a place which the hand can grab it and take it one day from them. And I accumulated wealth in a place that no one can take it away from me, upstairs. They accumulated wealth for their treasures, and my treasures are souls." Look at a different perspective. Where did he get that kind of a perspective? He wasn't confused, he had clarity. He had complete clarity of what was important and what was not. He was in peace with himself. No conflicts being pulled in this right direction, being pulled in that direction. No, he was focused. He knew exactly what's important in life and what's not. Look how he reacted. Look at his explanations. Completely on target. I'm saving for upstairs. You can't grab it. No one can grab it from me from there. Over here, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? People will take it away from me, perhaps. I put it away in a very safe place. Nobody can take it away from me. Yitro, same thing. Moses' father-in-law, right? Yitro. He had a lot of clarity when he advised Moshe what kind of leaders to choose, what kind of judges to choose. He says, "Let me tell you, it's important that you take God-fearing people who don't care about money, who have self-control, truthful people. These are the kind of people you have to choose. Be careful who you choose. Who should be a judge, who should be a leader? You just can't take anyone. People who have integrity." So, how do we get there? How do we adapt these characteristics? We have to learn. Only one who learns about these things has a chance, because without learning, just to do it on your own, just to think about it one day, get up, I'm going to be like that. No. Who's going to guide you? Who's going to give you the direction? Who's going to give you the encouragement to be like that? So it's only through learning that we will know what to emphasize and what really matters in life. You know, when I talk about priorities and what really matters, people don't always understand what really is important. So I just like to share perhaps this story that gives it a little bit more of an understanding, that clarifies this point a little bit better. There were 2 sisters, and the 2 sisters grew up together, they got married, and each one went their way. However, their mazal was very different. Even though they're sisters, their mazal, their fate, their destiny was very different. One of them became very wealthy because she married a very wealthy individual. The other one was very poor because she married a very poor man. And we're talking here about extremes, complete extremes here. The wealthy one lived in a palace. The poor woman lived in a shack. The wealthy sister, her husband was a very successful entrepreneur. The poor sister, her husband was a water carrier. You know, in those days, to draw water from the well. That's the way he supported his family. So anyway, they haven't seen each other for a long time. So the rich sister decides to pay a visit to her poor sister. And she comes one day and knocks on the door, and she sees for herself for the first time, wow, a shack. A real simple, plain shack. And she embraces her sister, and she says, oh, you look so good, my sister, that I can't really understand. Even though you look so poor and you barely have anything and I don't see too much furniture, I see this smile on your face. You're so happy. And the poor sister tells the rich sister, yeah, it's strange, that you are so wealthy, but you look so sad. Each one was questioning the other. And the rich sister says, yes, I have a lot of money. You see, I have a fur coat. I live in a big house. But what good is all this money, all this wealth, if my husband treats the maid better than he treats me? She obviously didn't have a good marriage. And you, my poor sister, why are you so happy? We have very little, you're right, but I have the best husband in the world. He treats me like a queen. I have good children, and thank God we're healthy. So you tell me, what's more important? All that money, the big house, 10,000 square feet, 12 bathrooms. Think about it. You have everything. A tennis court too, by the way. What good is all that? If you're not treated with respect, you're not loved. Children don't behave themselves, they don't listen to you. You tell me what's more important. So people sometimes are confused. Yes, this is definitely a more comfortable generation with a lot of more luxury and comforts. But people are not happy. Why? Because something is missing that should be there. And if it were there, they would be happier. But they don't have the clarity. Remember, this is a time of darkness. They don't have all this clarity of what that thing that they're missing is. So, to us it's obvious. Good kids, a good marriage, respect, more important than money. Yeah. You go out to the street these days, you think you're going to see families with kids? Not too much. You're going to see people walking their dog. Much more than 30, 40 years ago. What happened here? I'm telling you, everything is falling apart. All the values that we understood, that were clear to us, no more children, you don't want children, you don't want to have a family, you don't want to get married. What happened to that? No one to hunger. Maybe I guess a dog doesn't give them such a hard time. But that's exactly what we're witnessing today. And that is what the rabbis tell us. The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. Even though they meant the impudence, the lack of respect. But perhaps this emphasis of having to walk a dog instead of having to take your child to school has become a priority to them. It's sad. Now look at China. If you know the history of China, it's a very interesting history. They put a lot of effort, manpower, to building a big wall. It's called the Wall of China. It's a tourist attraction, and it's impressive. And recently, they also built an incredible dam that provides them with a lot of electricity. Really, a gem of engineering. So they've demonstrated how they can put so much effort and energy and resources into these things. But can you imagine what would happen if people, including the Chinese, would harness all the spiritual forces, the good forces, to conquer evil? World War II was an attempt to do that, but it was not initiated. It was brought about through the evil forces. And we had to, of course, do something about it. But imagine if the world, instead of putting money and so much energy into building this wall, and what was it for? To defend yourself from the enemy. What a shame. But they had no choice. That's the only thing they knew. That's the only way they can defend themselves. But there are other ways. If you take all the forces of good, you harness them to try to conquer evil, you get a lot farther. You won't have to build this wall. As somebody said, when will there be peace? When the power of love overcomes the love of power, then the world will know peace. The power of love has to be stronger than the love of power. Until now, we've had so much love for power, for money, more conquest, more territory. So they've had to build these walls. Today they have to build missiles, and missiles against missiles. All this defense, what for? They're not harnessing all the forces of goodness, the pure forces, to conquer evil. When it comes to our health, physical health, people take vitamins, and that's something very good. If you know which vitamins to take, they may help you, may strengthen you in many, many ways. It's something that is encouraged for people who have especially a weak immune system. You want to be strong, you want to be able to fight off disease, you want to feel good. And obviously, depending on what it is, it may actually help you. But what about vitamins for the soul? We need an injection for that too. We want a vaccine for that too, to be able to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves against all the evil forces out there. What about that? And they exist too. Take it, for example, Tehillim, Psalms, 150 chapters. Have a whole lecture of every single verse, an explanation of every single verse. It's a beautiful, powerful book. Guaranteed that it will help you. Guaranteed. Vitamins for the soul. Just one example. Read it in the language that you understand. And if you do it regularly, you will feel better. You will see some things that you haven't seen before. You will gain clarity, especially in this age of darkness. So since everything appears to be falling apart, what should we concentrate on? What should we do? The only advice that I can give right now is just make sure that before you leave this world, that you pick up the diamonds, the real diamonds that exist, and not the fake diamonds that are made out of glass. Because there are two kinds of diamonds these days. Real diamonds and fake diamonds. They're called zirconium. People are busy picking up glass, the fake diamonds, things that are worthless. They can't take it with them. Make sure you don't leave this world before you take the real diamonds with you. Just like Mumbaz the king, he knew what the real diamonds are. In helping people, being charitable, being kind, and being good. These are the things that you take with you upstairs. These are the real diamonds. Just like to end, that there is a prophecy in Malachi that says as follows, that in the end of days there will be a very special, unique book. Liyirei Hashem ulechoshvei shemo, a book of remembrance for those who feared God and for those who valued Him. Yes, there will be some people that will be written in that book of remembrance. Just like there were righteous of the nations who risked their life, who did something special. They are recorded in that book too. Remember, there will be such a book, and there will no way be a chance to be neutral. You either will be in that book or not. That's it. No chance of being neutral. And that is what Moshe did during the time that the Jews worshipped the idol. He called out, Mil Hashem Elai, who wants to be on God's side? Let him join me. That was a time to choose. That was a time to decide. You can't stay neutral. There will come a time where you will have to make a decision. Do you want to be in that book or not? And I think Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, who has some very nice quotes that I like, said something very, very befitting to what we're talking about. My concern is not whether God is on our side, even though that's important too. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right. you want to make sure that you're on God's side. And the way to do that is to adapt the forces of goodness. And I just put together 4 that correspond to the 4 physical ones that we mentioned earlier: gravity, electromagnetism, and so forth. The name of Hashem in Hebrew consists of 4 letters. So it's not a coincidence that here we're talking about 4. And the forces of good are goodness, of course, to do acts of good, self-control, unity is very important within the family and with others, and repulsion. Why repulsion? Because sometimes you have to resist, sometimes you have to reject, sometimes you have to refuse. You need to have that power too. Remember, you can't be neutral. So you have to take a side. So sometimes you have to say no. If something is not right, you have to protest. Sometimes if you can't, fight it. So you need these forces. You need to adopt these forces in order to be able to be on Hashem's side. And of course, one who adopts these forces of goodness will end up being on the right side and eventually will also win the war.